Welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here today with us. My name is Silvana Loaiza. I am part of the Sustainable Public Procurement team within the One Planet Network at the UN Environmental Program. We are very excited to have you join as we explore how sustainable and circular public procurement can drive near zero emissions and resilient buildings. And while we wait a few minutes for the session to start, please feel free to drop a message on the chat. Introduce yourself, your organizations, where are you joining from today? And we can go ahead with some housekeeping rules for this session also. On the next slide, please. So this session is being recorded and will be available to you afterwards through the COP's Buildings and Cooling Pavilion website. We will share the link to all the participants after the event. And as we go through today's presentation, remember that you can submit any questions you may have using the Q&A feature that should be at the top of your screen. We will have a dedicated Q&A section after the panel discussion. Also, a quick reminder to engage with the session. We will have a few questions, so don't forget to engage with the polls we will be using during the session. So, as I see many people is connecting, I would like to start introducing our moderator for today's session is Mr. Matthew Cahen. Matthew is a senior policy analyst in the Infrastructure and Public Procurement Division of the OECD. He works on several projects in different regions of the world, including on effective delivery of large infrastructure, the implementation of a strategic approach to public procurement, and the impact of public procurement on productivity through selected case studies with New Zealand, Finland, and Chile. So welcome, Matthew, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Silvana, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. It is a pleasure for me to moderate this discussion and this workshop organized in the margin of the COP29. The topic of this discussion and of this workshop could not be more timely. As you all know, there is a critical need to achieve near zero emission and resilient buildings by 2030. And the reason for that is that the construction sector is responsible for 38% of global greenhouse gas emissions due to exponential material extraction. So finding ways to minimize the share of the construction sector in contributing to climate change is vital. For that, there are different tools, and one of which is sustainable public procurement. Sustainable public procurement is key to shift the construction sector towards sustainability, essential for meeting the Paris Agreement goals and the climate objectives. Why public procurement is a vital tool in that effort? Well, first of all, by its economic significance. Public procurement accounts for close to 13% of GDP in average across OECD countries. But even more than the economic significance of public procurement, it's also the role of governments as role model, as leaders in specific sectors. Governments are the primary customers in many industries, and that is the case, of course, of the construction sector. A recent report from the UNEP found that across the different stage of the building cycle, the two most influential stage in terms of global emission were the design of buildings and the construction of buildings. And those two stages are places where public procurement can drive significant change. The OECD carried out a recent survey of green public procurement practices across OECD countries. And one striking fact that the survey found was that almost all OECD countries, 82% to be exact, recognize the role of public procurement and of green public procurement, sustainable public procurement, in achieving their national commitments, meaning that almost all OECD countries politically affirm the role of public procurement in supporting their climate goals. However, what we are seeing in practice and in the many different projects we have the pleasure to work on is that the mainstreaming of practices is often lacking. And here again, I would like to emphasize the importance of multilateral exchange, of international cooperation. There is a number of fields to make sure that sustainable public procurement is addressed to its full potential that requires international cooperation. From financing mechanism to coherent regulation to harmonized reporting system, all those elements require international collaboration. So again, it is a pleasure for me to moderate this panel today and to have the chance to highlight some of the perspective and the insights coming from practices from across the world. So to help me in that respect, and you can certainly acknowledge that this is not a small task, to help me in that respect, I have the pleasure to count on the wonderful panel that I would like to introduce. I would like first to start by introducing Mr. Jorge Laguna Celis, who is the head of the 10 YFP, One Planet Network Secretariat at UNEP. Jorge is the director responsible for the United Nations Environment Program, One Planet Network, a global community of practitioners, policymakers, and experts working towards achieving SDG 12, ensuring sustainable patterns of consumption and production. So welcome, Jorge. Next, I would also like to introduce you to Ms. Annika Lindblom, Director, International and EU Affairs at the Ministry of Environment of Finland, who is also the co-chair of the 10 YFP board. In her post, she leads a unit responsible for multilateral and bilateral environmental cooperation, as well as the coordination of EU matters within the environmental sector in Finland. Great to have you here, Annika. Third, I would like to turn to Ms. Anne-Claire Howard, Director of the Procurement Group at UNOPS. Anne-Claire has over 20 years of experience in heavy industry and raw material sustainability, good governance, and responsible supply chain management. Most recently, she was the CEO of Responsible Steel, a global multi-stakeholder standard and certification initiative that aims to maximize the role of steel in building a sustainable society. I would also like to introduce Dr. Mervyn Jones, who's Senior Advisor at Circular Economy at Rijkswaterstaat, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands. Mervyn has a background of over 25 years in sustainability, circular economy, and resource efficiency. His technical areas include infrastructure and construction, plastics, food, and textile. Welcome, Mervyn. I would then like to turn to Mr. Irendranath Rabunjon, OSK, Director, Procurement Policy Office at the Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning and Development of Mauritius. Mr. Rabunjon joined the Ministry of Works, Mauritius, as an architect in 1980 and retired as the Director of Architecture in 2014. Presently, he serves as a Director of the Procurement Policy Office at the Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning and Development since 2021. He was elevated to the rank of Officer of the Order of the Star and Key of the Indian Ocean on 12 March 2018. Welcome, Mr. Rabunjon. I would also like to introduce Mr. Kennedy Mateka, Deputy Director, Building Safety and Quality Assurance, National Building Inspectorate of the State Department for Public Works, Kenya. Kennedy has served in the public sector for the last 15 years in the area of design, documentation, and supervision of various public infrastructure projects. He also coordinates climate change initiatives, working to integrate national climate change objectives in the building construction sector in Kenya. Again, very grateful to have you here today. I would then like to turn to Ms. Cassie Sutherland, Managing Director at Climate Solutions and Networks, C40. Cassie supports global cities to accelerate climate action in the areas of energy and buildings, urban planning, climate resilience, among others. Prior to joining C40, Cassie was at the Greater London Authority, working on increasing London's climate resilience, and has worked across UK government on energy efficiency of residential buildings and smart energy system. Great to see you again, Cassie. I would then like to turn to Dr. Sunita Purushottam, Head of Sustainability, the state of Mahindra. Dr. Sunita has over 25 years of experience of sustainability strategy and environmental consultancy experience. Sunita has worked with regulatory bodies in the UK and India in various infrastructure development projects, city planning and construction projects covering environmental impacts and mitigation. Sunita has executed over 50 engagements in sustainability business strategy, sustainable development, and corporate social responsibility across the UK, United States, Mexico, South Africa, and India. Again, welcome to this panel discussion. So you see that we have a lot of varied experience coming from the public, the private sector, from different perspectives and different ministries. And those different perspectives would certainly help us to address the many dimensions on which we can leverage sustainable public procurement to achieve near net zero emission buildings and resilient buildings. But first, to kickstart the discussion, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jorge Laguna Celis from UNEP to first formally launch the Global Framework for Action, which has been developed to introduce a tool that will help precisely implement those practices in reality, and which emphasize the life cycle approach to sustainable public procurement in construction, embedding circular principles from planning to deconstruction. So Jorge, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mathieu, and to my colleagues that have enabled this event, and to the over 200 partners that have participated in the development of this global framework for action. We are extremely delighted today to be here together virtually, both in Baku and wherever each and every one of you is based and located, to first of all celebrate the milestones that we have achieved all together in creating, and we will see that in the panel discussion and in the presentation that I will do now, a significant achievement which will come and complement global and international efforts to help decarbonize our built environment. But also we are here today to demonstrate actions that can be aligned with the framework's principles and think on how we can make commitments to act that will help us take the ambition of COP29 to the reality of COP30 with great milestones, with important commitments, and with important results. I am pleased here to represent the United Nations Environment Programme and its One Planet Network. We are a solutions-oriented network comprising over 4,200 organizational members, 140 national focal points, and 6 global programs that are working in a number of issues from procurement to construction, consumer information, sustainable tourism, lifestyles, and skills. Today, it's an important day because we are addressing a heart of the matter, which is how can we create demand through public procurement? First of all, and you heard it from Matthew, it's a big market. We know that most countries spend over 50% of their resources over public money. It's in many instances over 30% of GDP on buildings and infrastructure. So if we want to create demand for greener, for more sustainable and more circular buildings, the first consumer that we have to tap on, the first one that we have to convince is our governments that are spending public money in providing the basic services, infrastructure, and built environment that we require for our societies. The second is that we know it very well, construction and the built environment is a sector with big impacts, both environmental impacts, but also big, important, positive social and economic impacts. We know that it's driving 37% of global GHG emissions and 50% of global material footprint. We know that 40% of solid waste in developed countries and 50% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 have not been built yet. Therefore, this is an agenda that brings together global North and global South. We also know that between 11 and 30% of global GDP and 7% of jobs that the sector represents are also driving opportunities. Next slide. So what sets our efforts and our global framework that we are launching together today apart from other initiatives? First and foremost, I would like to say that one of the biggest elements that we have and one of the factors that makes us very strongly motivated about its success is that it is a first initiative that addresses the whole life cycle of buildings from a circular economy perspective. And it considers both embedded and operational emissions. It is seeking and looking at minimizing waste throughout the building's processes, from the planning, the design, the operation, and eventually the reconstruction or deconstruction of the infrastructure. Second, and this is also important today as we gather around the Buildings Pavilion in the context of the Breakthrough Agenda and the Global Alliance of Buildings and Construction, it is an initiative that it is fully aligned with existing and ongoing efforts, including the Chaillot Declaration that was recently concluded just last year here in Paris, the Buildings Breakthrough, and the IDDI Green Procurement Pledge that is supported by some of our very important partners of the One Planet Network. Last but not least, it contains practical actions. It includes, and today we will spend a little bit of time discussing what are some of these potential pathways, what are some of these potential elements and avenues that stakeholders, including governments and local stakeholders, can take to create effective change at local and national levels. Next slide, please. We know that the only way to meet success is through demand-based approach that actually create market transformation. And next slide. And we also know that the pathway to achieving near zero emissions buildings as the new norm by 2030 is by enabling governments to create and to lead by example, and by enabling and empowering governments that are making decisions through the procurement processes to ensure that we create infrastructure that sets the norm, shifts markets, and create opportunities for market readiness and innovation. Next slide. And so what we started, and just looking back really at the moment of celebration of this milestone moment where we are, was a year ago. We started a robust process of consultation with many of the panelists that you will hear today and many that are participating in this event today, a robust process that leveraged from the expertise from stakeholders across the construction value chain. And we brought together over 200 institutional experts that attended both physical, in-person meetings and virtual meetings, comprising questionnaires and desk review. We can see here the establishment of an international advisory group, and it is very difficult for me, but I invite you to take a look at all the partners that are here. It will take us a long time to read this list, but each and every one of these partners has brought their central expertise, whether it's an NGO, a private sector entity, academia, UN international organizations, and intergovernmental organizations, financial institutions, and governments, both at the national and subnational levels. We brought together for a specific consultation the private sector entities and also bilateral discussions, and we undertook a public sector survey comprising over 22 national governments. And I really want to please the governments that are present today, both as speakers from Kenya, from Mauritius, from Finland as well, and other governments including Armenia, France, Tunisia, United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, USA, Morocco, that have been part of this effort. Next slide. So what we're presenting today is, as a matter of fact, the result of this very strong, inclusive, multi-stakeholder process of consultations to come up with something that can work. And basically what we're presenting today and we're launching and celebrating today, it's a framework for action. This framework for action is comprised of 5 principles, and we will go a little bit in them in a little bit of detail. But beyond the principles, we also have the actions. And today we thought that we would make a good use of the remaining minutes that we have to launch this framework, and as we move to the panel discussion, to discuss some of these actions and the potential benefits that they may bring. Principle 1, in the principle, it's, if we can move to the next slide. Here are the 5 principles, but we're short of time. Let's review them all together quite quickly. The first principle, I think we all agree, and this is quite a given, it's to recognize the critical role of national and subnational governments in accelerating circular and sustainable public procurement for really transforming our built environment. We already discussed the why, and now we need to see the how. One way in which we can make this strong recognition is just by committing to implement the UNIDO IDDI initiative, which speaks about green public procurement. And it's a pledge that requires participants to conduct whole project life cycle assessments for all public construction projects starting no later than 2030 and achieving net zero emissions across all public construction projects by 2050. Let's move to the next, and there's a number of other principles and initiatives and actions that can be taken. But if we start by looking at assessing and addressing the whole life cycle perspective in the way we plan our buildings, we are making already a difference. The second principle is about financing, planning, and design stages. We know that these have the greatest amount of influence. How can we facilitate and collaborate amongst architects, engineers, financiers, and contractors? How can we create spaces as governments develop their tenders and offers and market proposals that bring together the key aspects of both design, financing, and engineering from the early stages, so as to align the procurement, what we can buy, what we can deliver, what we can finance, and actually what we can innovate. These we know can maximize impacts across the value chain. Next principle. We also know that we need to embed circularity and the goals of near zero emissions and resilient buildings throughout the entire procurement life cycle across all stages of the construction value chain. One example from our priority actions menu is to adopt procurement policies that include specific requirements for circular design, material reuse, low carbon materials, and waste minimizations. Only then we will be able to ensure that these requirements are clearly outlined in the tender documents. This is critically important in the way we phase out our tenders and in the way we call for markets to provide us with services that contain complete and full life cycle assessments. Next common principle. The fourth common principle is to leverage skills development and knowledge sharing to scale up action. And we know that by providing training programs for procurement officials, by creating communities of practice in which the procurement officials that are working in similar types of tenders and a built environment calls for proposals can learn best practices, can include certain components on life cycle perspective, can find ways of innovating in the way they are using public resources. Only then we can enhance the understanding of sustainable practices on circular economy concepts and translate the vision into action on near zero emissions technologies. It all goes through correct, well-planned, well-used, well-managed tender processes that also strengthen national capacities to spend money better. And the last principle that we are launching today together with a priority action, it is to address all environmental impacts, including but not limited to pollution and the effects of nature, to ensure that what we do on climate and what we do in resiliency does not have unintended negative consequences. And an example of an action that can be adopted is to establish clear methodologies and benchmarks with life cycle assessment at the center that will allow us to measure the environmental impacts and also to assess the cost effectiveness of sustainable public procurement strategies. We know that we can complement this by using surveys, evaluations also that will help us identify barriers and opportunities for scaling up SPP in the construction sector. So with this very short presentation and with the panel discussion that we are going to be having in a few minutes, addressing some of these priority actions and the 5 agreed principles that underpin this assessment framework, we want to invite you to join this community of practitioners, to join this coalition, to help us raise and implement commitments associated to important agendas such as the Buildings Breakthrough Agenda, but other international frameworks that I already explained are embedded into this global framework for action. There is the information here on the link, and we will continue to be sending more material and ensuring that as we meet a year from now, we can already start assessing, measuring, and quantifying the progress that we have made in ensuring that this global framework for action makes a difference in our climate agenda. Thank you very much, Matthew. I hand the floor back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jorge. And thank you very much for walking us through the framework for action, which feature very interesting both principles but also action. I think one of the very distinctive feature of this framework for action is precisely to develop a sort of menu for governments and countries to choose from, noting that the policy priorities are not the same across countries and across the world. So providing the scalability to the framework is certainly something extremely useful. And the second point I would just like to very quickly emphasize is 2 of the principles that you mentioned. The first one is capacity. We see, and that's true for sustainable public procurement, but that is also true for other broader policy objectives where public procurement is seen as a potential lever. There are oftentimes policies, there are oftentimes strategies, but also oftentimes capacity is overlooked. Not only capacity from the public sector, but also capacity from the private sector. So again, thank you very much for highlighting this very important element. And the second one, of course, relates to measurement. The saying say you can't improve what you can't measure. And I certainly think it is relevant to achieving near zero emission buildings, and again, leveraging and demonstrating the role of sustainable public procurement in doing so. So again, thank you so much for walking us through. And again, I'm sure that everyone is happy to join and celebrate today the launch of the framework for action. So now I would like to start the panel discussion. Again, a lot of extremely relevant and insightful panelists. And I would like first to start the panel discussion with Anne-Claire Howard, Director from the Procurement Group at UNOPS. And Anne-Claire, would you mind introducing to the audience the National Circularity Assessment Framework for Buildings that UNOPS developed as a tool to drive near zero emission and resilient buildings by advancing circular economy principles, minimizing waste, enhancing resource efficiency, and reducing emissions. Anne-Claire?
Sure, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name's Anne-Claire Howard, and I'm really, really excited to be here on this panel for the launch of the Framework for Action. And I want to thank Jorge for his very inspiring words and for kicking off what I think is really a momentous day. As you said, the One Planet Network and all of its members are really about providing real solutions for real problems. So alongside the framework, it is really my privilege to announce that today, the One Planet Network, in collaboration with UNEP, UNOPS, UN Habitat, and with funding from the government of Finland, is launching a toolkit to assess circularity in the building sector. So this National Circularity Assessment Framework for Buildings, yes, I know it's a little bit of a mouthful. I'm sure someone will think of a really cool acronym for it at some point. This allows governments to evaluate the circularity of their building sector using qualitative and quantitative indicators. So it focuses on materials and building design to understand the material and waste flows, the environmental footprint, and the economic and social impact. So this looks both at the physical environment, so for the neophytes in the room, the buildings that you can see, and the enabling environment, which is everything that supports change within the building sectors. So this is it's a quantitative and qualitative assessment, as I said, but which also provides very specific guidance on how to calculate metrics and a digital questionnaire to perform this qualitative assessment. So this included the mobilization of stakeholders, looks at status quo and projections towards 2030 and 2050. And what the analysis shows is the gaps in the sector, including the gaps in the enabling environment to support the prioritization of actions. Now, this toolkit has been piloted. It was piloted in Ghana and in Bangladesh. It's now available online. You can all see the QR code, and it's also accessible via the One Planet Network website. I hope you'll all take a moment and have a look, and more importantly, share this information with your networks. From these pilots, we've learned that the importance of an adequate policy framework for circularity in the construction sector is paramount. And this is where the public procurement enabler is not just the enabler, but the client. Now, as we've heard the statistics around this, infrastructure is a public sector business. On average, 83% of investments in infrastructure projects in 2017 was sponsored by government entities and or state-owned enterprises in the developing world. And you'll all be very much aware that the built environment is part and parcel of achieving sustainable development outcomes. Now, Jorge outlined some of the principles in his introduction, but basically what this boils down to is the public sector has to lead by example. It has to create the enabling environment that is needed by the private sector to advance sustainable construction projects. Because when the public sector incorporates criteria for net zero emissions and resilient buildings in its tenders, it can really act as a catalyst for competition among suppliers, which in turn incentivizes suppliers to improve their environmental performance. And this creates a ripple effect throughout the supply chain. We've also seen, and I'm sure some of my colleagues on the panel will share experiences in this space, but the public sector can be an early adopter of new technologies before they become mainstream. And we've seen this happen already time and time again. Public procurement should really be approached as a highly strategic policy and implementation instrument. And I think that people who have joined this call probably don't need convincing. But looking at the evidence, and despite the relevance of public procurement in achieving sustainable outcomes, a mapping that was conducted in 2023 of measures in 60 NDC contributions from developing countries revealed that only 9 of these countries actually included measures related to public procurement. And most of these measures focused really on sourcing goods and services, with only 1 that actually addressed public investment. And in my mind, this is really a huge missed opportunity to leverage the power of public procurement. Sustainable construction public procurement is really in its infancy. And there's a lot of work that we can do to enhance this space. And policies which are outside of the scope of public procurement are also important to favor and enable an ecosystem that can really help support circular economy, urban planning, building codes, waste management. And you need all of these policies to actually work symbiotically. They are outside of the scope of public procurement, but they are public sector policies. And so having holistic approaches to this, where you can use public procurement as a force for change, can really help drive systemic change that we know is needed to bridge the gap on achieving the SDGs. Now, all of you sitting here will know that this is already a challenge to achieve in developed countries, but it's even more challenging in the developing world. I'm fortunate to work for an organization that delivers infrastructure, procurement, and project implementation in over 80 countries, and especially in fragile contexts. And we've started trying to do this in the projects that we do. But what we've realized, and I think this touches on the point that Mathieu was making, is that building the capacity of our partners in this space is also a fundamental part of successful outcomes. So I just want to finish off by offering my most sincere congratulations on the launch of the Global Framework for Action. And I think that truly by leveraging sustainable public procurement, governments can drive market demand, create meaningful change, and lead by example, hopefully making net zero emission and resilient buildings the new standard by 2030. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the other panelists.
Thank you very much, Anne-Claire. Thank you for both presenting this new practical tool that could support efforts and initiative across the world, and also for insisting on the fact that implementing sustainable public procurement with impact requires coordination, not only within the procurement world, but also with the outside world, with a number of public sector policies to be able to drive meaningful changes. Well, next we'll hear from Mervyn, and maybe Mervyn can also let us know a bit more how that happened in practice, in concrete. The Netherlands are often looked after when it comes to achieving sustainable goals using public procurement. So Mervyn, would you mind sharing with us both the strides that Netherlands made in aligning procurement policies with climate goals, how the government has designed its sustainable public procurement policy with the objective to mainstream circularity and also to promote market readiness? Is Mervyn with us? I see him connected. Well, maybe we'll just let Mervyn settle the technical issues that might affect the connection, and then transition to the next speaker, and then we can come back to Mervyn later on. So I would like to invite Mr. Rambo Jun, Director of the Procurement Policy Office of Mauritius, to share a bit light on the steps that Mauritius is taking in developing a sustainable public procurement policy framework for the construction sector. Could you share concrete actions and plans for implementing this framework, and also discuss the challenges you experience and lessons learned so far?
Thank you, Mashu. It's a pleasure for us, Mauritius, a tiny island in the Indian Ocean, to be present on your platform. It's really a great pleasure. And in fact, we are in the midst right now of carrying out certain directives of government. Mathieu, you as well as Mr. Laguna were talking about public procurement should be harnessed into this effort. And I can say that our government is committed to give us the tools, to give us all the necessary support to introduce SPP. In fact, this was a result of the OECD exercise carried out using OECD tools to carry out the MAPS assessment. And in the assessment, there is a sentence which I would like to read, and it will clarify what we are aiming at. It says, there is no policy strategy in place to implement SPP in support of broader national policy objectives, no implementation plan, system or tools, and legal regulatory framework lack sustainable provisions. This is the report of 2 years ago, which government in the budget, the budget speech has mentioned that now the policy office, that is my office, will be responsible to develop the framework for SPP in the construction sector. So you see, there is a positive thing. Other thing I wanted to point out was in Mauritius, the private sector has already started on their own to bring this circularity as well as reduction of waste and waste management and having efficient buildings and looking at the life cycle costing of buildings. So both private sector and the government sector are already working in this direction. Now, we have appointed a consulting firm after an international tender, after international bidding exercise. And this consultant is now preparing the framework for us. And it is expected that all the steps have been carried out, and we are expecting that by January, this framework should be available. Now, as far as the implementation is concerned, we have the consulting firm is preparing. Our friend Mr. Laguna also talked about getting the building documents, getting the tender specifications. So we are right now we are in the phase of preparing the standard bidding documents, and these will be made public after approval of government, and we will have meetings with all our stakeholders to hear their efforts towards being able to answer to what is under the new SBDs. The consultants will undertake some training exercise, and this is expected to be completed, as I said, by January next year. The challenges, I must say that there are many. In the literature review, we have seen that there are no country which has developed so far any policy framework for SPP. Though I hear there is a toolkit, but I will surely visit it and we'll see how best we can make use of it. Other important thing is we are a very small island, and we are a small island state with the specificity of islands, cyclones, dramatic change in climate. And right now, while I'm talking to you, we are under a cyclone warning class 1. And one of our islands, which is about 300 kilometers away, is under cyclone warning class 2. So we have moved from the tin sheets and poles and iron sheets building. We are moving towards more resilient, more cyclone resistant construction. But of course, we are not doing it in a rational way. This is where maybe government should set the rules of how to carry out this, how to specify materials for construction. There is already a lot of waste, I must say, while construction are going on. There are many international companies working here, and the waste that is generated is not taken care of. So now we are going to prepare bidding documents and give building permits on conditions that they satisfy these requirements. Other problem that we are facing, of course, is there's a lack of professional know-how in the government sector. On the island itself, there are very few. Most of them are outsourced, people who come from elsewhere. We haven't developed really to that extent our local professionals to be able to come up with the sustainable specification, how to check, how to test, how to carry out tests on sites. All this is still to be developed. And lastly, I would like to say on the challenges is the financial implication of implementing the SPP, be it at the level of government or in the private sector. Only those who have the funds can manage the levels that we are expecting. As far as lessons that we are learning, we are still on the learning curve. It's too early for us to say what are the full lessons, but we are recording all our, whatever we are undertaking, we are recording for the future generations that will come. So I thank you for your question. And if you have something else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Habunjun. Great to hear that the MAPS assessment of Mauritius led to concrete reforms, including precisely the development of sustainable public procurement policy. That's certainly inspiring. And also just to mention that the upcoming country program of the OECD with Mauritius would also and could also focus on working and supporting the effort of the island in developing climate resilient infrastructure. So again, very much looking forward to this future work and to see how it can integrate sustainability objectives. Now with this, I would like to move from the island to the African continent and to ask Mr. Kennedy Mateka from the State Department for Public Works of Kenya to share with the audience its experience in terms of specific needs and interest from Kenya to implement sustainable public procurement. What challenges and opportunities do you anticipate in the process? I know that this is very early in the process, but what do you see as being first the needs that it will respond to, and then potential challenges and opportunities you will face?
Thank you, Ahen, and everyone panel. It has really been a pleasure to be in this process.
We can't hear you very well, Mr. Kennedy.
You can hear now?
Slightly better. If you could just speak a bit more loudly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's better.
Yeah. I'm saying I'm very glad to be part of this process and part of this team today here as we launch the framework of action that is to give us, a way forward in terms of how best we should mainstream sustainable construction practices in our various institutions and sectors. And therefore, back in Kenya, public authorities and institutions are looking forward to procuring goods, services, and including works, with a reduced environmental impacts and reduced social benefits, and enhanced social benefits rather, throughout their life cycle. And we have been able to demonstrate this by enacting what we can call a green incentive policy, which has really made special focus on circularity and sustainable construction practices, and specifically supporting the circular economy in our construction sector. Of specific interest is that within the policy, the government intends to incentivize local construction materials with specific percentage, in this case 40% recyclable content, and even establish facilities for waste collection and even resell, and further impose necessary fees on contractors for non-compliance on waste disposal procedures that goes into this process. Additionally, we're also keen on supporting various green building incentives, including developments, to meet the green building specifications, whether it is the process of our design, production, importation, sale, and all including research and development activities to that effect. And therefore, as we also carry out all that, and that as Kenya implements the Sustainable Public Procurement Initiative, it is also crucial to address various challenges that we also face. One being the issues relating to the deforestation, the issues around water scarcity, and even eminent pollution that goes into this. And therefore, the implementation of the framework will really help mitigate these challenges that we face as a country by prioritizing products and services that are environment friendly and further reduce our carbon footprint and promote biodiversity. Additionally, we'll also be keen to stimulate local economies through our procurement process, and specifically in line with that, the country has initiated a process of review of what we call our National Public Procurement Act, and scale up the local content that is to be procured within the goods, services, or even construction works from 30% to 40%. This is a legislative proposal that is already in the floor of the House, is government initiated, to see how best we can scale up. And therefore, this is not only supporting the MSMEs, but also with a view of fostering job creation within our societies, communities, and every of our investor that is in this field. Additionally, sustainable procurement practices as an opportunity is also saving a lot in terms of the cost and in long term, and further reducing resource consumptions and waste management costs that are related in this endeavor. And therefore, we're also aware and talking to the issues relating to our interests. Kenya is a signatory to various international treaties and initiatives, including the International One Planet Network Initiative. And therefore, in the same breath, therefore, we aim at promoting sustainable development goals by implementing the SPP aligned with these commitments and further ensuring that our public procurement contribute positively towards achieving the SDGs, specifically the SDG number 12, which OPN is anchored on sustainable and responsible consumption and production, as well as climate action, goal number 13. Therefore, compliance with the international standards also enhances our country's reputation on the global stage, aware that we have been very key to promote and support sustainability initiatives. Therefore, we are keen on growing and harnessing, and we also see a bigger opportunity in the launch of the framework of action today. Finally, the issues relating to challenges and opportunities as we look forward on implementation of the SPP, that there is a general lack or inadequate awareness and the understanding among the professionals that are in this process, specifically the professionals, our bid and professionals being as our architects. Therefore, many may not be familiar with the principles that we have talked about and how to even integrate them in the procurement processes. So these are gaps that can also lead to resistance of adoption and mainstreaming of this initiative, something that we should all work together as a team to see how best we can deal with the challenge altogether. The second challenge relates to the issues of our suppliers. And we all understand and take note that there is limitation into this effect, particularly in certain regions and even some sectors. The material value chain processes is a multifaceted industry and has multiple players involved, and therefore the scarcity, this kind of a scarcity can restrict, various public entities, not just in Kenya and not just in the region, but at a global level, from sourcing sustainable products and services. And therefore, it may also plow back and take us back to reliance on traditional supplies that may not adhere to the principles of our framework of action. Lastly, as a challenge, then is issues relating to the bureaucratic processes that procurement is enshrined into. Aware that procurement is governed by a complex cabal of regulations that sometimes hinder the adoption of sustainable practices. And therefore, these regulations may prioritize sometimes costs over even sustainability. And this therefore making it difficult for procurement officers and even built environment professionals consider environmental and social factors when making purchasing decisions. So these are some of the issues, but we also see the bigger opportunity around this conversation. And one of the specific opportunities that there is an opportunity of harnessing and growing our innovation among the suppliers, manufacturers, as they develop new solutions, new models that meet sustainability criteria. This innovation and these new materials can lead to even better quality of products and services, extremely at a competitive prices over time. And that is something we also look at, and that is the role and part of the intention of this initiative. Secondly, that the adoption of this, the sustainable practice can lead to even enhanced reputation of organizations. We are looking at how best, products, services that are being offered in public and private institutions can become even a case of, appreciation of various organizations. And this is how citizens and stakeholders can demonstrate their commitment into the whole conversation around sustainability and social responsibility. This can also foster trust, and support from even not just local partners, but even international partners. And therefore, this is a new area that we are looking at creating new brands for our society and for our works. Finally, the issues relating to, avenues of collaboration. This, starting with the kind of conversation we're having today, we are seeing an opportunity of enhancing and advancing our sustainability component around collaboration between various government entities, whether they are in South-South, whether they are in the global North, our private sector companies and organizations, and profit-making organizations, and even any stakeholder who is especially focused on sustainable initiative. And therefore, such partnerships can enhance resource sharing, knowledge exchange, and in this case, will be in a position to grow sector that is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mateka. Thank you for highlighting the need to ensure alignment between market capacity and public needs, and also for insisting that this is not this is an incremental effort. This is not something which happened overnight by the fact that you have developed SPP policy. So we'll hear later on in the discussion from the private sector, and it might be interesting also to see what are the driving forces that are generated in the private sector thanks to the initiatives from governments. But before turning to the private sector, I would like to look at and to discuss the major spender, which is the subnational level. Across OECD countries, subnational level accounts for 2/3 of public procurement expenditure, making it the first customer of choice of the private sector in many different sectors. So for this, I would like to invite Cassie Sutherland, Managing Director for Climate Solutions and Networks, C40, and to share with us what is the perspective of local government in their, or what is your experience with local governments, their capacity to drive circular and sustainable urban development through sustainable public procurement. How is C40 supporting cities in harnessing sustainable public procurement with the view to reduce emission and enhance resilience in the building sector?
Thank you, Mathieu, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this great panel discussion and to be here for the launch of the Framework for Action and the new toolkit in assessing circularity in the building sector. It's really, really great to be here and to be able to talk a bit about the role of cities and how they're already really using public procurement to reduce emissions, enhance resilience, drive a just transition in terms of the buildings and wider construction sector, but maybe also to say what more that cities could be able to do with further support and really leveraging a lot of the great voices that we've got on this panel today. So maybe just as a brief introduction, I'm from C40 Cities, and C40 is a network of nearly 100 mayors of the world's largest cities who are working to deliver the urgent action needed right now to confront the climate crisis and deliver a future where everyone, everywhere can thrive. And mayors sign up directly to the C40 network and really make a strong commitment to use a science-based and people-focused approach to help the world limit global heating to 1.5 degrees and increase urban climate resilience. So I often talk about C40 cities as being unashamedly ambitious in terms of their climate action. And of course, that means we know that public procurement is one of those key actions and real kind of powers that cities have available to them to be able to send strong demand signals to the market, to be able to hopefully build confidence and therefore see a wider change across some of our large urban centres around the world. And Mathieu, as you were also mentioning the kind of scale of public procurement, it's worth, isn't it, reminding us of always that stat of public procurement representing around 12 to 13% of global GDP. And so really that the unlocking power that can have, I think also in its direct impact, but also that kind of wider ripple effect that it can have. And in cities around the world, there's a range of different powers available to cities in terms of where they can set standards and regulations, particularly around the buildings and construction sector. But they always have that kind of direct impact through their public procurement. And you would often see that the largest category of public expenditure in municipal budgets is for buildings and infrastructure. So it really does offer that great opportunity. At C40, we're supporting cities, the member cities within C40, but also wider cities around the world to really use this purchasing power to drive circular and sustainable urban development. And some of the sort of activities and support that we offer to city is around building the capacities within cities to create strong demand signals for what we call clean construction, which is really tackling embodied emissions within buildings. And as I said before, to then send that strong signal to market so that they can have the confidence to invest in the solutions that are needed, whether that's from low carbon materials, low emission or zero emission machinery, new methods of construction, wider skills training and upskilling. And one of the key ways that we do this is through what we call our C40 Clean Construction Accelerator, which is where a number of mayors from different regions around the world have taken a strong mayoral commitment to really look across the whole life cycle of their built environment and focusing on municipal procurement. And it gives a chance to aggregate city demand and really show that there's a global movement within our urban spaces to demonstrate the strength of commitment from cities. And we also bring together around 50 cities around the world into a peer-to-peer knowledge sharing network, which provides this safe space for cities to share the ideas and solutions that they have in order to drive circular and sustainable construction, but also to share what's gone wrong. A safe space to say, this has happened in my city, it didn't work how I expected it, let's all learn from that and also come together and kind of crowdsource some of the ideas and solutions. And that includes one of the needs that cities said to us was really needed was some further training across different departments within cities. And I'm sure some of the other panelists on the call from governments recognise as well sometimes the siloed nature of some of our departments within government, within all levels of government. And so we've provided e-learning across departments, trying to bridge that gap between procurement and finance departments and then sustainability departments, so that you can start to see people coming towards around a common objective. And some of the areas where we're kind of requiring some of that leading by example from C40 cities around their own municipal procurement is to start requiring life cycle assessments for all municipal projects, and to start looking at the diversion of construction and demolition waste. This was mentioned, a high proportion of waste was mentioned by one of the earlier speakers. Using municipal purchasing power to procure zero emission construction machinery, and then also looking at incentive-based mechanisms, so rewarding resource efficient and circular design. So that's the real principles that we're looking at, but I also wanted to give you a few tangible examples of where cities are already leading the way and really showcasing some of great progress, great action. And I hope that would inspire others to take that action too. And certainly it's what we're looking for from other cities to support them on. So maybe just to start with a quick example in the city of Oslo, who really dramatically changed the use of construction machinery in the city by using their procurement power. And this was through zero emission construction machinery. So basically electric excavators, diggers, instead of previously diesel fueled ones. And Oslo used their procurement powers to set a requirement for zero emission machinery to be used on a big road in the centre of Oslo through its renovation. And there weren't really, about 4 years ago, any large electric construction machinery available in Oslo at the time. But this drove the market to start to bring in some of these solutions. And now, on over 30 construction sites in Oslo, you can find that there's electric heavy-duty construction machinery being used, and it's had a national influence. So over 15% of national sales of new, large, heavy-duty construction machinery are now electric. So I think that also shows the power of cities being able to influence a wider national market as well. And then maybe to go quickly to the city of Portland as well in the United States, where they have used their municipal projects and municipal procurement to establish a low carbon concrete initiative. And this is where they've set certain reduction values in the carbon intensity of the concrete mixes used in municipal projects. And in some of the new projects that are about, it's just got introduced last year, new projects that are coming online in Portland, we're seeing a 35% reduction in the emissions associated with concrete use in those projects. So a real significant shift by Portland setting the kind of requirements and limitations, and that's leading to new projects being brought to market. And then I wanted to, just before I end, briefly touch on also the importance of a just transition within this sector. And we know that a just transition to clean construction is key to success. And without that this will be a failure within our cities in terms of the reliance on jobs within this sector, the need for that change to happen in a fair and just way. And maybe just brief examples of good practice on that. We're seeing in the city of Curitiba, where there's been the largest urban solar farm, where the city of Curitiba had a disused landfill that had been capped, no longer used, couldn't have any buildings or housing built on that, and so actually decided to put a large solar plant on top of that old landfill. And the notice for that, the requirement for the installation companies, included a requirement to hire a minimum number of female employees, and really starting to increase the number of women who were working on construction of large-scale projects in Curitiba, alongside those companies having a gender equity policy and to employ a gender and race focal point. So looking at this point of really kind of end-to-end integration of ambition across a just transition, tackling mitigation through reduced carbon emissions, and also increasing the resilience of our built environment. Thanks very much, Maciej.
Thanks very much, Cassie. Thank you for bringing all these very concrete examples. I was last week in talks with the person responsible for the project in Oslo. It's indeed quite impressive, and especially what you mentioned about the mainstreaming effect of these strategies and the fact that then it trickles down different projects, different cities, different institutions, and help indeed bringing those efforts to a broader scale. Also, thank you very much for highlighting the potential in joining forces and try to create critical mass of cities in some of these projects, as some of these projects also require significant investment, and that was also linked to a previous comment that was made earlier. So I think all these elements provide really useful and insightful perspective from the initiative in the governments, in public sector and public administration at all levels of government. Maybe now it's time to hear the perspective of the private sector, how the private sector reacts to these increasing need and this increasing call for sustainability in construction. And I had to admit that I earlier presented Ms. Sunita Purushottam mentioning and referring to Mahindra as a state. That's not a state, it is a company. Apologies for that, but so the company that it could be certainly assimilated to a state. So Ms. Purushottam, would you mind explaining to the audience and sharing with the audience how in your company, as demand for sustainable public procurement grows, especially in the drive from near zero emission and resilient buildings, how is the private sector adapting itself to meet these ambitions?
Well, I had a slide deck. I don't know whether that will be, thank you so much. So thank you. It is a great honor to be here today, and it is definitely a very important day with the launch of the Global Framework for Action for harnessing sustainable and circular public procurement for net zero emissions and resilient buildings. And its 5 principles must not only guide governments across the world, but it can be also used by private enterprises to drive their procurement practices. Moreover, in India, the private sector ambition has risen quite a lot with respect to ESG and ESG commitments in the built environment. we are actually seeing a lot of hiring of sustainability professionals across the value chain, which means architectural firms, MEP firms, consultants, all of them are prioritizing sustainability quite a lot. We see that number of people coming together wanting to do sustainability has increased. Now, what has caused this change? One is probably the regulator here, which is, all listed companies in India have to be to report their business responsibility and sustainability report to be part of the listing, the SEBI listing, that is the Security Exchange Board of India. It is called the BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. One of the principles of that report is actually sustainable procurement. And also various other responsible business action. The other driver of this action is actually investors and development banks, which are driving sustainable procurement, green ratings, and green buildings. And private sector basically is driving this kind of, it has taken a lead. So if you can go to the next slide, at Mahindra, we have a planet positive framework, which is basically in 3 pillars, which is greening ourselves, decarbonizing our industries, and rejuvenating nature. We have a target of becoming carbon neutral by 2040 on our own operations, reduce our water consumption, go net zero on water and waste, reduce zero waste to landfill targets, and also focus on material circularity. And I'll come to some of the examples of material circularity that we have adopted and various other developers are also adopting. In decarbonizing our industries, we have a 100% portfolio, green certified portfolio. And I think a lot of these certifications, whether it is for materials and for the built environment, really helps us shift to net zero buildings. We have a commitment to go to build all buildings, new buildings, net zero by 2030, net zero energy, net zero water, and net zero waste. The net zero transition of suppliers is actually supported by a platform that we have created called the Decarbonization Business Charter and the R&D that we do in Mahindra Terry Center of Excellence for materials that come in and are low carbon and also can give thermal comfort, are tested in this laboratory. So thermal comfort, visual comfort, operational, and how it impacts the operational energy is tested. So all new materials have to be fit for purpose. So these are these 2 initiatives, that is the Decarbonization Business Charter, which I'm going to talk about in my upcoming slides, and the Mahindra Terry Center of Excellence actually helps in supplier support or vendor ecosystem support for new materials. Next slide, please. We do have a policy, and many companies, developers are adopting a green supply chain management policy, which has principles of circularity, high recycled content, FSC certification, and health benefits associated, the health impacts of various materials such as paints and adhesive. And there is a certification called Green Pro by rating agencies or certified bodies. Those will be preferred over other material. We've also specified requirements for fire suppression systems next, so that they are halon free. That's another important criteria. Next slide. This is, yeah. So here we are talking about, how just give me a minute. Yeah. So I mentioned about, transitioning to net zero and to low carbon homes. Mahindra Life Spaces, it has been recognized as an organization leading net zero movement in India by the India Green Building Council. And we have the first 3 multifamily residential homes, which are first net zero home in Bangalore, the first net zero energy and waste home in Mumbai, and the second net zero energy and waste home in Bangalore. What are some of the things that are tied with energy and waste? So if we look at the materials that we are using, materials impact the waste certification. So we have actually looked at replacing 30% of the cement with ground granulated blast furnace slag, which is the byproduct of steel and iron making, or fly ash, which is the byproduct of thermal power plant. That is actually the fly ash piece is driven by a policy of utilization of fly ash from the thermal power plants. It is a government policy. We also look for a secondary steel. In fact, this is something that is common in the construction sector in India. We are also seeing replacement of wood, aluminum formwork for Maivan construction technologies, so that repetitions can happen and carbon emissions can be avoided. Next slide, please. Yeah. So some of the actions that we take is design optimization. And look at how the weight of steel and cement. So some of the earlier speakers spoke about design. Look at technologies and BIM to see whether we can reduce material quantities and inventory management. Eco-label product, I spoke about Green Pro and prefabricated components. We are also looking at deconstruction. In one of the earlier sessions at COP today, we are looking at removing the word demolition and bringing in deconstruction, because that is where we start recovering and reusing of the materials, and actually finding a place for every type of material that comes, because there is a lot of redevelopment activity happening in India, especially in Bombay. So we're looking at how we can acquire salvage materials and use it in many of our project offices, sales galleries, and so on, and various temporary structures. So it has now become a company practice that even when the sustainability team may not be part of those discussions, our projects team and admin teams have accounted for recycling while looking at deconstructing and building a new office. And also, of course, rapidly renewable materials, and looking at alternative materials such as coconut-based materials or wood wastage materials apart from FSC certified materials. Next. So these are some of the practices that enable us to move towards net zero or near zero homes. The supplier engagement in the company, and here we of course have a code of conduct, and many other developers are also looking at code of conduct. We have a minimum qualifying must have criteria to do business, and then qualifying. We understand that it is difficult for many small and medium enterprises who are doing business with us, and they may have different levels of maturity for environment, labor, and business ethics. And therefore, we do give them a chance, and we handhold. And some of the mechanisms of handholding I will cover in my subsequent slide. There are other vendors who are actually have leadership standards. So we work with companies that are lift manufacturers or glass manufacturers or concrete manufacturers who may have exceedingly high environmental and sustainability standards. And for them, we learn and we collaborate, and they are part of the decarbonization business charter. And every year we meet, and subsequent meetings with our variety of stakeholders that we have. These are some of the sustainable practices adopted by our suppliers. Now they come to us with various solutions that, maybe we could do this, or maybe we could do something else to reduce packaging waste, to look at, how they can supply materials to us. So these are the two thought leadership partnerships projects. I spoke about the decarbonization business charter. This business charter has over 85 signatories now, and it has 6. So basically, it is commit, collaborate, report, and refer. So what it means is all signatories have to commit. What do they have to commit with? So there are 6 priority actions: design net zero building, adopt science-based target, improve operational efficiency of net zero buildings, mainstream low carbon materials for net zero buildings, and develop mainstreamed climate aligned building codes and standards, and of course monitoring. So one of the commitments is mainstreaming low carbon materials. So if the signatory is a material manufacturer, that's the next slide. So I'm on the next slide. Yeah. So So I'm talking about the decarbonization business charter. So if the signatory is on the decarbonization business charter, If they are a material manufacturer, they get an opportunity to probably collaborate with a developer who is on the charter for pilots. So because the developer has committed to these priority actions of mainstreaming low carbon materials, it is difficult for small and medium enterprises to actually. So I'm coming to some of the challenges that we encounter. New product development is driven by startups, and they need assistance in scaling and bringing fit for purpose solutions. This platform can enable pilots, adoption, and support for responsible business models. So big companies trying to help small companies and trying to do the right thing. The other question is around capacity building. Of course, there is a need for capacity building because anything that you like to change, that you want to change, there is resistance from the business as usual because it is an effort. Right. So capacity building programs, as mentioned earlier, can ease this transition and give access to right agencies, tools, and support that support this transition, and enable companies to make business case. So whether it is a developer trying to do the right thing, or whether it is a vendor trying to push the right solution, and of course the third-party certifications and labeling enable companies and give credibility to the green products. Green finance is another aspect that can help companies, both the developers and the material manufacturers and the value chain, so that testing of new ideas can happen, experimentation can happen. But there is a challenge here that green finance is not very straightforward, and access to green finance is not open for all. There is a need for capacity building for local developers and tier 2, tier 3 city developers to understand how to access green finance and do the right thing, especially in the global south. So with that, I would like to lastly talk about that the Indian government actually,
so I will ask you to speed up.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Apologies for forgetting, but I understand that we still have a few polls to run in this workshop before ending the discussion. But again, thank you very much for sharing all these details and concrete example about how the private sector is working towards greater sustainability, and also not only in its own operation, but also throughout the supply chain. And the differentiated approach you took with different types of supplier is certainly something relevant. So I believe that unfortunately we do not have enough time for questions, but I'm sure that Silvana and colleagues will respond to any question or clarification, the few clarification that I saw in the chat. And I think now it's the time to run a few polls, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Matthew, thank you. The questions will appear on the screen. I would like to invite everyone to send a quick reply. And maybe I would read the question. The first question is your organization currently implementing or supporting the implementation of sustainable public procurement in the construction sector? And does it incorporate circular economy principles into public procurement practices?
Thanks, Silva. And we see from responses received so far that for the majority of respondents, there are plans to support the introduction of sustainable public procurement, but further development would be required. So it's an ongoing effort for most of the respondents.
Here we have a second question, Matthew.
Yeah, so here the question is, what do you see as being the biggest barrier to implementing circular and sustainable public procurement for near zero emission and resilient buildings? So here again, we'll leave 1 minute to respond. So with World Cloud, we're seeing that cost, of course, is one of the main barriers which have been identified, along with financial constraints. But we'll see also some themes around knowledge gaps, availability, market capacity. But we see from respondents that, yes, indeed, cost is one of the predominant factors that hinders the implementation of circular principle in public procurement.
I believe we can start the third question.
Sure. So the first question asks, which of the following knowledge gaps would be most beneficial to address for advancing SPP in your organization? Whether it's life cycle assessment, whether it's life cycle costing analysis, or circular economy principles in the built environment, or the monitoring and reporting mechanism which you feel are absent, or finally, whether market engagement strategies are effective at engaging supplier in SPP initiatives. And here from initial responses, we see that it's really about the economic understanding of those decisions and understanding where the most of the impact would come from when it comes to sustainable procurement decisions, alongside with monitoring and reporting mechanism, which makes sense and of course is closely linked to a greater understanding of the impact of those strategic decisions.
Thank you, Matthew. We have 2 more questions to go. Here is the 4th question.
Thanks, Silvana. So the 4th question is, which of the 5 common principles of the Global Framework for Action should be prioritized to achieve near zero emissions and resilience in the building and construction sector? So which is the principle that you would prioritize to achieve the objective of the Global Framework for Action? So looking at initial responses, we see that responses are relatively evenly distributed, although the most prominent one, it's Principle 3, which is about embedding circularity and goals of near zero emission and resilient buildings throughout the entire procurement cycle. So not just at the tendering stage, but also introducing those elements into the pre-tendering phase and in the contract management phase.
And the 5th and last question.
And so the last question is about game-changing actions. What do you feel could be decisive in advancing the principle of the Global Framework for Action? And here we see that, cooperation stands out as one game-changing action. And I believe that this was also addressed in some of the presentation and the discussion. Mission, so making sure that there is a vision towards the implementation of the Global Framework for Action. And procurement is, of course, front and center to this initiative. So thank you very much for having responded to these different questions. That would certainly be useful in refining and thinking about future activities. Now, and again, acknowledging that we're a little late, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Annika Lindblom to provide closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Chair, moderator, and thank you for the opportunity to close this very inspiring event today. As Jorge Laguna said in his opening words today, we have all participated in this event to demonstrate commitment and action. My country, Finland, has worked hard to become one of the forerunners in Europe in sustainable buildings and construction. And we also have a long history in promoting international cooperation related to sustainable and circular built environment. Finland led the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program, the SBC program of the 10YFP in 2015 to 2022, together with UNEP and RMIT University in Melbourne. And I'm proud to say that the SBC program paved the way across the world for circular built environment. It was the first global program that mapped circularity indicators of the construction sector and linked these indicators to the SDGs. The SBC program also highlighted the importance of the Global South to lock in sustainable and circular approaches in the buildings and construction sector. This important work that we initiated continues now under the Global ABC Materials Hub in close partnership with the One Planet Network, and Finland leads the Circular Built Environment Working Group of the Materials Hub together with the RMIT University. Finland has also actively supported the development of our main topic today, the Global Framework for Action, through the Circular Built Environment Group and as one of the donors of the One Planet Network Sustainable Public Procurement flagship initiative. The Global Framework for Action supports our shared vision of sustainable and resilient buildings and construction sector, and I'm happy to be part of the launching event here today. Circular and sustainable public procurement can act as an accelerator and support mechanism for achieving the climate goals. It has an important role when we want to change the materials use in the building sector. Circular and sustainable public procurement is not just a procurement strategy. It is also a transformative tool to a net zero emission and resilient future for the built environment. And when it is implemented effectively, circular and sustainable public procurement can also harness public expenditure, which is a substantial part of national GDPs, as we have heard today. And also, I heard today that public sector can and it must act as a role model in supporting economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable procurement. And to scale up our good practices that we have all heard also today, we need global partnerships. The Global Framework for Action stands as a complement to significant international initiatives such as the Chaillot Declaration, Buildings Breakthrough, and the IDDI Green Procurement Pledge, all of which are amplifying the urgency and potential of our collective mission. The Global Framework for Action goes beyond these high-level commitments to deliver practical steps, practical tools for national and local stakeholders to drive tangible change. And together, these alignments strengthen our ability to push forward unified global standards that encourage innovation, foster resiliency, and ensure that no region or community is left behind. So I would like to thank the organizers, distinguished delegates, and everyone in the audience. And finally, I would like to encourage all of you to take today's insights home and support the Global Framework for Action as an active contributor to a sustainable future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Annika. Thank you for this inspiring word and for having summarizing as well some of this discussion. It was a pleasure for me to moderate this session. Thank you very much to the organizer. Thank you, Farzana, Silvana, and Gina. And I believe that the recording will be available on the UNEP platform. So again, it was a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.